Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress with Game 6 of the 2018 World Championship match between the world champion Magnus Carlsen and his challenger Fabiano Caruana. And what a game it was. Here we see the handshake before the game, which was played on Friday the 16th of November 2018. Carlsen white, Caruana black. Let's have a look at what happened. Carlsen opened e4 in the second game of this match. He opened with d2, d4. In the fourth game, c2, c4. And in this game, e2, e4, the world champion shows his whole range. e5, knight f3, and knight f6. No surprise, Caruana plays the Petrov defense, his favorite opening against e4. Knight takes, d6, and now a very rare move from Carlsen. He played the knight back to d3. There are 77 games in my database with this move, while there are 51,000 with the retreat knight f3. And also knight c4 and knight takes f7 are more popular than the move played in this game. Carlsen was trying to catch his opponent in the opening, take him out of his preparation. But Caruana knew the theory. He took on e4, queen e2, the knight is now pinned, queen e7 is the only way to unpin the knight and protect it at the same time, and knight f4. With a threat of knight d5, which will be attacking the queen. It will be attacking the c7 square with a fork. The queen has to make sure she keeps protecting the knight. It looks like a problem for black, but Caruana shows that he's fully prepared for this sideline. And it again shows how difficult it is to catch a top player in the opening. Caruana had some recent experience with his opening. In the Sinquefield Cup in August, Wesley So played knight c3 against Caruana. This game ended in a draw. Knight f4, as said, was tried by Carlsen. And knight c6 is a novelty. Not played in any game before, but Caruana after the game said this is theory. He knew this was the best move in this position. Knight d5 and then knight d4. That was the idea of knight c6. Counter-attacking white's queen while white is attacking black's queen. And I have to show you a funny variation that was shown by Grandmaster Saron in one of the broadcasts that I followed. Queen c4 looks very good for white. Black's queen is still attacked. His knight on d4 is attacked. c7 is attacked. All very good for white, apart from the fact that he's losing on the spot with knight c3, a discovered check from the queen on the king. If you take the queen, then there is knight takes c2, and this is checkmate. Very nice checkmate with two knights. Okay, back to the serious stuff. After knight d4, Carlsen took on e7, and Caruana took on e2. A most unusual way to swap the queens. The knight back to d5. White has played 9 moves so far, and this is the 7th move with this knight. Only beginners and top grandmasters can play like this. Knight d4. And now you can take on c7, but that's not good for white. Knight takes c7 check. King d8. Knight takes the rook in the corner. But now it's black's turn. King e2 and knight takes a1, and that is good for black. So after knight d4, Carlsen did not take on c7. He played knight e3, protecting the c2 square. So there's no knight takes c2 now. Black does the same thing, knight e6, protecting the c7 square so that white cannot come into that square. f3, kicking the other knight. Knight 4 to c5. d4, kicking the knight again. We see the knights dancing around in the first few moves of this game. Knight back to d7, c3, c6, attacking that knight. On d5, knight back to f4, and another knight move. We have played 14 moves, so a total of 28 moves. 14 by each player, and 19 of those 28 were made by a knight. Quite remarkable. Bishop d3 developing, d5, knight back to c2, bishop d6, and here Carlsen took on e6, swapping one pair of knights. Knight e2 is an option that was looked at in the broadcast by Chess24 by Grandmasters Petrov Fiedler and Alexander Grishuk. Knight e2 keeps more pieces on the board, and using the old principle that 2 black pieces want to be on e6. The knight wants to be there, but also the bishop wants to be there. So then knight e2 looks like a good move to give black a little problem. But as Petrov Fiedler explained, then black can castle, and after king f2 he can play f5 threatening f4, which will blunt this bishop and this knight. And if white plays f4, then black will start to play his knight around to the nice square on e4. That's why Carlsen took on e6. Retreating the knight was not good. Bishop takes e6. Black has no problems at all. We have a symmetrical pawn structure. Usually in the Petrov defense, black has some small difficulties to equalize, but in this position he has achieved full equality. And that's the reason why that knight d3 idea on move 4 is not the main line in the Petrov. King f2 and h5 to stop white expanding on the king side with g4 and h4, at least to make it more difficult. Knight a4 is also a nice move which stops white from developing this bishop because the knight is attacking the b2 pawn. But h5 was played by Caruana. Carlsen played h4, and Caruana is going to reroute his knight from c8 to e7. Knight e3, eyeing up the f5 square and supporting a possible g2, g4 push. And Caruana plays knight e7, controlling the f5 square. g3, so not g4. Carlsen not playing g4 immediately shows that he sees that there is not anything to play for, explained Grandmaster Saruman. And now an important moment in this game. Caruana plays c5, a surprising move, a courageous move from Caruana, changing the pawn structure, bringing the game back to life. And he does that with his king still in the middle. He can take on c5, and then bishop takes c5, pinning this knight. King g2 is then a good move, and then black can play d4 to solve his isolated pawn. Energetic play from black. After c5, Carlsen did not take. He played the bishop back to c2. Black castled, rook d1, rook fd8, and knight g2, threatening bishop e3, and if black then takes on d4, white can take back with the bishop, and the d5 pawn is an isolated pawn. So Caruana takes now, before the bishop can come to e3. He takes on d4. You can't take with the rook, because of bishop c5, winning material because of the skewer. So Carlsen took with the c-pawn, and we still have a symmetrical pawn structure. Here Caruana played rook a to c8, and the age-old problem, which rook to play to c8. Rook dc8 was better, a better chance, recognizing that the rook is no longer useful on d8, and the other rook can be brought into play over the a file. Grandmaster Ashley showed this variation. Bishop b3, then a5, threatening a4. White has then to play a4, and then rook a6, with the idea of rook b6, harassing the bishop, or play rook a to c6, doubling the rooks on the c file. So all that after rook d to c8, but as mentioned, Caruana played rook a to c8. Bishop b3 from Carlsen, and knight c6, on the way to the nice square on c4. Black has a little something here. White has to play accurately. Bishop f4 from Carlsen, finally bringing that bishop into play, and knight a5, rook d to c1, and here you can take on b3, a takes b3. This is okay for white. Carlsen mentioned this idea in the press conference, the double Isolani on the b file, with the rooks having an open file to work with. But Caruana did not take on b3. He also did not take on f4. That would not be good because that brings white's knight back to life. Caruana played bishop b4. And here bishop c7 was given as a better move by Carlsen in the press conference. He said he should have played this. And then he showed this variation. Knight takes b3, a takes b3. Then rook e8 to save the rook. Knight f4. Bishop d2 and rook d1, and this is okay for white. But Carlsen did not play bishop c7, he played bishop d1, and he was not happy with that move after the game. Knight c4, b3 to kick the knight, but it's weakening the a3 and c3 squares, and in a few moves time we see black's minor pieces appear on those squares. Knight a3, and now black is threatening to play bishop c3, and that's winning material because the rook on a1 has no squares. So Carlsen took on c8, rook takes, and rook c1. Knight b5, attacking the d4 pawn. Black is enjoying himself. His knight is still jumping around. Carlsen took on c8, bishop takes, and knight e3, counter-attacking the d5 pawn. If you now take on d4, white takes on d5. After knight e3 you can play bishop e6 to protect the d5 pawn, then knight c2 to protect the d4 pawn, bishop c3 to attack that pawn again, and then either king e3 or bishop e3 to protect the d4 pawn. Those are possible variations. But after knight e3, Caruana played knight c3, hitting now this pawn on a2. Also attacking the bishop. Carlsen played bishop c2, not wanting to give up the bishop pair. And bishop a3, a funky move, said Grandmaster Ashley. The bishop is preventing the a pawn from going up the board. Carlsen said afterwards that he had missed this move. He played bishop b8, attacking the a7 pawn, a6, and f4. White's a pawn is going to be lost. Carlsen keeps the pressure on black's d pawn. Bishop d7, on its way to c6 to protect the pawn on d5. f5, bishop c6, and now bishop d1. Now white is attacking that pawn on h5. Knight takes d1 check to get the bishop pair is the engine's choice. The engine wants to play with the bishop pair, but Caruana plays bishop b2 instead. He's going after the pawn on d4 now. Carlsen took on h5, move 40, the time control was reached, and Caruana played knight e4 check. King g2, and now the d pawn goes off the board. Central pawn, which makes this d5 pawn very strong now. Black is still calling the shots. He has a strong passed d pawn, and white's pieces are not coordinating well. If you look at where they are, all over the place really, while black's pieces are nicely grouped together, nicely coordinating. Bishop f4 from Carlsen. His knight was attacked. And bishop c5, making room for the d pawn to go forward. And now Carlsen had to make a big decision. He thought for a long time here. He could have played knight c2. That's the passive way of defending. White will have a hard time stopping black's d pawn. Carlsen instead played bishop f3. And he was going to sacrifice a piece for 3 pawns. Knight d2. And now we get this forced variation where white gives up a piece for the 3 pawns. He took on d5, that's the first pawn. Bishop takes e3, bishop takes c6, and bishop takes f4. White does not have time to take back on f4 because his own bishop is hanging on c6. So bishop takes b7, that's the second pawn. Black saves his bishop, and bishop takes a6, that's the third pawn for the knight. Knight e4 and g4. And black is still playing for a win, but Carlsen thought he would be able to draw this game. What he wants to do is give these 3 pawns for black's 2 pawns. Then he will get a draw. Black played bishop a3 with the idea of knight c3 to win a pawn on a2, and Carlsen said this was the second time in the game that he had missed the idea of bishop a3. When he went for this fourth line, he thought he would have 3 pawns for the piece, but now it turned out he only had 2 pawns for the piece, and he said that he was worried here. Bishop c4, king f8, g5, knight c3 ready to pick up the pawn on a2, and Carlsen decides to give the b pawn instead of the a pawn. He played b4, protecting the a pawn. Caruana took the b pawn, king f3, knight a4, bishop b5, knight c5, a4, and now f6. Criticized by Grandmaster Saruman as Caruana now allows the white king to come in over the light squares. This is a tremendously difficult endgame. I was following the game on 3 platforms, and there were a total 5 grandmasters who were talking about this position. Judith Polgar on the FIDE World Chess site, Grandmasters Sarah Ron and Ashley on the St. Louis website, and Grandmasters Fiedler and Grishuk on the Chess24 site. And every time I switched from one to another, they had different opinions about the endgame. Black was winning, no, it was a draw. White had a fortress, no, he didn't. The player said at the press conference that they thought that White should have a draw here. Let's look at what happens. King g4, knight e4, king h5, bishop e1, attacking the h4 pawn from behind, bishop d3, knight d6, and a5. Carlsen gives up the a pawn to set up a fortress. It's distracting the bishop. Bishop takes a5, g takes f6, g takes f6, and there comes the king to g6. And now this pawn will start marching if black allows it. For the moment, the f-pawn is attacked, so bishop d8 to protect the f-pawn, and king h7. It's important that white does not allow the black king to come to the corner, because then black would be winning. As mentioned, both players thought white had a fortress here and black should not be able to make progress, and it looks like their assessment was correct, although we still have one interesting moment to come. Knight f7, bishop c4, knight e5, bishop d5, bishop a5, there comes h5, bishop d2, bishop a2, knight f3, bishop back, knight d4, king g6, attacking the pawn again, so bishop g5, and bishop c4. As mentioned, white has to make sure the king does not get to the corner, so this bishop has to stay on this diagonal to avoid the king going to g8 and h8. But Carlsen had not played the most accurate moves, and here the computer was shouting bishop h4, a tempo move giving the move to white with a forced mate in 36 moves. Of course, for a human player, even for Caruana, it's impossible to come up with bishop h4 as the winning move. None of the commentators had spotted it, not even commentators who were using an engine. Not every engine gives this as the winning move, but it seems to be a mate in 36. In the press conference, both players were shown this move and they had a hard time to understand why this was winning for black. Grandmaster Ian Rogers, who had asked the question, was trying to explain it, but he also could not give the variations, so I will not attempt to do that. But it turns out that white gets in zugzwang, and then black wins the pawns by force and will win with his own f-pawn. Anyway, after bishop c4, Caruana did not spot bishop h4, he played knight f3, king h7, knight e5, bishop back, knight g4, bishop c4, knight e3, hitting the bishop again, bishop to d3, knight g4, bishop back to c4, and knight h6, king g6, and king e7. Caruana is going to bring his king around in a last attempt to win this game. Bishop b3, and there comes the king, bishop c2, king e5, bishop back, and king f4, bishop c2, knight g4, bishop b3, knight e3, threatening to take on f5, winning that pawn, but now white has h6. That pawn is going through, so you have to take it, and Caruana offered a draw, and both players shook hands. Carlsen is going to take on f6, taking black's last pawn, and this position is an easy draw. 80 moves and 6.5 hours of play. Sometimes a game that ends in a draw can be as exciting as a game with a decisive result. Here a picture from Caruana during the final stages of the game, closing his eyes for a few seconds. The handshake after 80 moves, the game was drawn, and here we see the table. 6 draws so far. Game 1 and Game 6 were the most exciting. The match is halfway, let's see what happens in the second half. The picture is from the press conference after Game 6, and this is Carlsen's reaction when he was told that there was a forced mate in 36, even when he thought the hard work was done by setting up that fortress with king h7 and h5. Carlsen said in the press conference, "From move 22 to the first time control I made many mistakes. Then I felt I had to fight for equality. In the endgame white is slightly worse, but I missed so many things. I'm just happy to save the game. When I played King h7 and h5, then I think I have a fortress. It's a good thing that fortresses exist. A few years ago, Carlsen claimed that he did not believe in fortresses. The fact I was white made me play a bit casually. If I had been black, I probably would have played more carefully. And Caruana said the opening was relatively innocuous. We got to an equal position. Lots of funny knight moves in the opening, but it leads to a dull position. The knight b8 c6 to d4 maneuver is theory. I think I had most of the advantage before the time control. I wonder if I missed something there. At the end, I thought white had a fortress. And the question was asked, is black the new white? Because black is doing so well in this match so far. And Caruana said it's just a series of coincidences that black has done so well. After this wonderful fight, the players deserve a rest day, and Game 7 will be played on Sunday, the 18th of November. I will be here after the game to tell you what happened. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply. If you liked the video, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.